Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to cover an introduction to creating and playing pad sounds. Now, you might ask, what the heck is a pad? Pad is like a droning sound, usually, well, not necessarily usually, but a lot of times it's on a keyboard, like a synthesizer, kind of a droning, long sustained notes, not a lot of like choppy rhythmic stuff, although sometimes that can be fun. Oftentimes this is like underneath some other kind of featured thing, so used in cinematic music, or it's used a lot in contemporary Christian music, or even sometimes you hear it like a little bit of a pad sort of thing in fusion style as well. It's all over the place, but it may be something that is a little bit weird if you're more of a straight ahead guitar player. You're not really an effects head, that kind of a person, but maybe you're interested. Maybe someone's asked you to do it. You walked up to church one morning, they're like, hey, we need a pad sound front of you. The keyboard guy's in here. This video, we're gonna cover kind of the basics, the fundamentals. And just a quick note, I'm gonna show you how to do this stuff on the Fractal FM3, but nothing I'm gonna do is specific to the Fractal FM3. I wanna cover this in a way that is generic and applicable to anyone, whatever gear you have. You just need a reverb and a delay and some other types of modulation effects, but those are even optional. So I'm going to cover this in a generic way, and hopefully by the time we get through the end of this video, you'll be able to throw together a pad sound that sounds good and is playable for you, and you know how to play it well. So what does a pad sound like? Well, here's an example. It sounds something like this. Now, to achieve a pad sound like this, we need to fundamentally change the guitar. The guitar is a rhythmic instrument, right? Here's our dry sound. I'm hitting the guitar, there's rhythms happening. Fundamentally, the guitar is a percussive rhythmic instrument. And to do a pad, we need to take all of that and throw it out the window somehow and transform this instrument. So the two things we need to do are chop off that transient, and get rid of that transient, and increase the sustain. The guitar, you know. Okay, that's actually a lot of sustain, but we need to, compress that, lengthen it, smear it together in order to get this sort of pad sound. So before we even get to the effects, I'm going to show you two technique aspects of playing these pad sounds. And the first is using a volume swell. So you can do this with your volume knob or a volume pedal. I'll just really quickly show you how to do it with either. And the point is that you pluck the strings and then you bring in the volume after you pluck the strings. And that gets rid of that transient. Here's what that sounds like. And I'll do that with my volume knob as well. So if you've got a good taper on your volume knob on your guitar, you can use that. Otherwise, you can use a volume pedal as well. So that's technique part number one. The second thing that I'll say, and I'll try not to harp on this too much because it's a pet peeve of mine, is this other knob on your guitar. I don't know if you're aware, but there is another knob on your guitar and it's useful. It does things. The tone knob. If you've never touched it before, I'm going to ask you to touch this knob. If you are building pad sounds and playing sort of like droning synth sounds on a keyboard, one of the things that you are doing constantly is you're touching this filter control and you're sort of playing it in real time. And what that filter often is a high cut. You can think of it as almost nothing more than a high cut. And guess what? That's what this does, this tone knob. So if we go back to, let me bring up an example of a pad. And I'll play you the difference between with my tone all the way up, which you've already heard, and then I'll roll the tone all the way back and you'll hear the difference. So here's with the tone up. And here's with the tone all the way down. So you can hear it's cutting out all of the high end, right? Which is the stuff that's it wants attention. The high frequencies are what wants attention from our brains and our ears. So really, really useful technique when you're playing these pad sounds is to just mess around with your tone knob while you're playing. Do you want it mellower? Roll the tone back. Do you want it to pop out into the chorus as you go into the chorus? Maybe bring the tone knob back in and let all that shiny stuff through. That's my technique number 2, and I'll try to stop harping on it, but use your tone knob. Okay, so we've covered the technique. The next thing we need to cover is the effects. And the first effect that we're going to drop in is a reverb. And the tip to remember with reverb is high mix, high decay, right? That's gonna get us a long tail, adding sustain, and it's gonna the reverberations are gonna kind of smear our volume swelled guitar signal together. So if we take a look at what I've got here, I've pulled up the large cathedral reverb. This is nothing special. This is not a purpose-built reverb for doing pads or anything crazy like that. It's not a modulated reverb. It's just a regular reverb, which you probably have on your pedal board already. And you'll notice the decay time, this isn't even super high. A few seconds of decay time is really all you need in a musical context to create a pad sound, because you're gonna keep swelling, right? You can keep it going as long as you want. Few seconds of delay time, really, really big room. The other key, like I said, is 100% mix here. You can dial into taste. You can go, anywhere 50 to 100% will give you different flavors depending on how much of the dry signal you want to let through. We're going to roll with 100% mix. It's a standard thing to do. So let me turn the reverb off. You'll hear what that sounds like with just the volume swells, and then I'll kick the reverb on and you can hear what this 100% wet reverb is doing. Sounds so weird without the reverb and with the reverb. So as you can hear, it's adding sustain and kind of smearing a little bit together. That's usable in a pinch as a pad, right? With just a reverb. So tip number 1, add a reverb. We want high mix and high decay. The next thing we'll add is a delay, and we'll add that in front of our reverb block. So if I switch over to scene 2 in this preset, which I will upload this preset to Axe Exchange for you FM3 and Fractal users if you are curious. You can go ahead and download that. So the second thing we're going to add is this delay. And so the trick with the delay, my tip for you to remember is lower mix, higher feedback. The point of this is that we want to create more repeats. We're going to take that swell signal and we're going to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. More repeats equals more sustain. And if you have multiple delays, you can kind of smear it together. And then the reverb is also going to do more smearing of those things together to remove the rhythmic content, or at least modulate, change the rhythmic content. So here we've got not a super low mix, like 30%. If your delay is darker, you might want to dial in more mix. Use your ears, right? If it sounds good, it is good. But you'll notice the feedback I've dialed in here is pretty high, right? So why don't I turn off the reverb and we'll listen to just what the delay is doing. Okay, so this is just the delay. So you can hear that's quite a lot of repeats, and we could even dial it in a little bit more if we wanted, right? Just use your ears again. And I'm just playing a single note there because I want you to be able to hear and count kind of in your head, feel how many repeats are going on there. It's going on for quite a long time. So let me play just a volume swell, like we would play this as if it were a pad, but leave the reverb off so you can just hear what the delay is doing. So you can hear that too by itself. You could probably just use that in a pinch as a pad. But when we throw the two together, it gets even more smeared, right? This is the theme with creating pad sounds. Is almost always more is better. All right, so I've kicked the reverb on. Let's hear what that sounds like. So hopefully you can hear that the reverb is adding even more smearing, and the repeats that we were still hearing when it was just the delay are even more sort of smeared out and less pronounced. And so that's the point of those two things. So at this point, we have a pad. We could absolutely just play with this pad and drone on and on and on until the chorus comes around. But now we get to have some fun. This is where we add modulation effects, anything else you've got on your pedal board that maybe you feel like could add some flavor and change the character of the pad sound. Again, the first tool you have for that is your tone knob, just to remind you. But let's talk about some different effects we can add to this. The first one that I'll suggest for you to use is a chorus. Chorus is going to add some thickening, add a little flavor. You probably have one on your pedal board. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like. This is exactly the same thing. I've just kicked on one of the stock choruses. I think this is just the warm stereo. So it's not even a crazy pronounced chorus effect. And it's at 50% mix. You know, whatever you've got chorus sound that you like, maybe throw that on with this big reverb and delay and see what kind of a pad sound that creates. So let's take a listen and hear how it sounds. So hopefully you can hear that's adding a little bit of thickening, a little bit of warbling, just a little bit of a different character to the sound that I think sounds pretty nice. And hopefully you probably have a chorus pedal on your board. You could kick that on and off and you've automatically got you've already got two different pad sounds that you can use. So that's the effect that I suggest first. Second thing we'll take a look at over on scene number 4 here is a pitch block. And I'm actually going to talk about two different ways we can use the pitch block. This first one is, both of these examples are going to have we're blending in two different pitch shifted versions of our signal. In this case, we're shifting up an octave and up 2 octaves. And I'll just point out that I've dialed in quite a bit of high cut, and the mix is not very high on the pitch. But this is kind of the beginnings of what you may have heard of as like a shimmer type of a pad. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. I'll roll the tone knob down. So we've added some pitch shifting, we've added some sort of like upper high frequency harmonics back into what we're doing. That's something that would be a little bit more pronounced, right? Maybe you're trying to get into the chorus, you're building tension. You can go for something like that. The next way that we can use the pitch effect is instead of an octave up and 2 octaves up, take that double octave and bring it down an octave. So we've got 1 octave up and 1 octave down. This is going to give you a kind of organ type of a sound. Yeah, let's check out what that sounds like. So that's a pretty cool effect. I think I actually use that quite a lot. You could use this pitch effect if you've got a pog, you've got this, right? Octave up and octave down. If you've got a whammy, you could do a similar thing. I don't know if there's a blend knob on the whammy though. But you know what? If it sounds good, it is good. try it. You've got all sorts of different harmonics that you can blend in. I think there's definitely a blend mode on at least the newer whammy. So if you've got that pedal, try it out. See what it sounds like to you. The next effect that we're going to cover that I'm going to suggest is even more basic. Probably should have done this one first, with a tremolo. You probably have a tremolo, more of you than have a chorus or a pitch block. But this just adds a little bit of movement to the droning, right? And it's going to be a little bit subtle depending on the depth you dial in. It could be really subtle or it could be more pronounced. And we'll take a look at a second option here as well. I've just dialed in a very reasonable sine wave, kind of pulled the rate back a little bit so it's a slow move. But let's take a listen to what this sounds like. So you can hear, even at a pretty high depth there, like 70%, that's pretty subtle. You could go for something more pronounced. On channel B here, I've configured this tremolo with a square wave and 100% depth. So this will give us more of like a chop type of a thing. And yes, we're adding back in. Notice that like earlier we tried to strip away all of the rhythmic element of the guitar. Now we're adding more rhythm back into the sound, but in a way that's controlled and a way that we can change and suits whatever the situation is. So let me shut up and let's listen to this choppier version of the tremolo pad. So those are two different ways you can use a tremolo with your pad sound to add that type of character. Just adds a bit of movement, right? Again, we've stripped out almost all of the rhythmic component. The tremolo allows you to add a little bit of that rhythm back in a way that you, in a controlled way. That sounds good. Now, the last effect that we will talk about is good old overdrive. No reason why overdrive can't join the party, the pad party, right? All the sounds we've covered so far have been on a clean amp tone, which is fine. Normally you want it to be mellower, but sometimes when you're trying to build tension slowly in a song, in a musical context, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of grit. And I find that, you know, in the right moment, a pad that swells in with a whole bunch of grit on it is just, it's so cool. It's so cool to hear. So what I've done here is on channel B of the amp, it's the same amp. I've cranked up the drive and I've turned on the input boost and set the saturation to ideal. So basically it's just a gainier version of the same exact amp. This is equivalent to like if I could have thrown a drive pedal in here. If you've got a dirt pedal, just throw it on and see what that sounds like. Here's what this sounds like. Little too dirty, you know, dial it into taste, depends on the context, right? But another way that you could do this is instead of playing chords, you can do single note line type of things like this. That was with the tone knob rolled down. Don't forget it's there. You can use it a lot in this type of a context. Well, that's it for this video. I know I didn't cover some of the fancier things the Fractal can do, but remember this was just building blocks. I wanted to really break down the basics of creating pad sounds and explain it so that anyone with standard reverb and delay on their pedal board, maybe some other modulation effects, could start to build a pad of their own if they have no context. So hopefully that was you. Hopefully you made it here. Thank you so much for watching if that was you. I really, really appreciate it. And remember, if it sounds good, it is good.